Western North Carolina has just experienced some of the worst flooding probably in the history of Western North Carolina. FEMA is offering assistance for the survivors of that disaster. We wanted to take some time and dive into how to apply and some of the language that you need to really understand so that you're answering the questions appropriately and triggering the relief that you are able to get through FEMA. I'm Tiffany Weber. Today I was joined by Layla Rogers. We're both attorneys with Thomas & Weber in North Carolina. So we wanted to make sure that we talked on the real estate show about how our friends and relatives in Western North Carolina can unlock and apply for that FEMA assistance. So Layla, I think given the tragedy in Western North Carolina after Hurricane Helene, Legal Aid of North Carolina, I think, is on top of things as far as putting out information for people. And typically in a disaster like this, the priorities, of course, are shelter, food, safety. But there are some other things that come up legally really early on that I think, I wasn't thinking about them. I see the news and I'm like, we got to get supplies to these people. And then seeing Legal Aid post about the FEMA assistance, I was like, oh my gosh, this is something that they got to start now. The deadline, I think, is November 27th. That's not long.
No, right around the corner.
Yeah. I mean,
but I at this point, I know so many are really just in emergency mode.
Yeah.
And so many people are still missing. And
yeah,
it's really just an awful scene. But for people who do have the ability to go ahead and apply at this point, there are 3 different ways to apply. You can do it online. You can call. And there's also a FEMA app that you can download to submit your application.
Which was kind of wild to me that that there's an app for that. It's good. Get it to people however you can. But I was just surprised that there's an app. And I also learned a lot through this about what types of assistance people can get. I had no idea. I mean, I can't imagine that the people that obviously are without power, in some cases without food and very basic things that they need to survive, lack of utilities, shelter, all of that. I did not realize how much of that FEMA would step in to at least provide some assistance if you apply. And I think also trying to get the word out that there is such an application, because right now they're not going to know that. There's way too much going on. So having a resource to come back to and say, okay, I can actually apply for this. This is what they might cover, and this is how to do it.
Right. And there are different levels of assistance. There's a critical needs assistance, which is a $750 thing that you can apply for that would help with gas, medication, food, clothing, medical equipment. Yeah. But then beyond that, they also have other levels that you can apply for additional funds if you've been displaced. They even have a separate application if you're facing unemployment.
Yes.
If you've lost your home and, you worked at a small business, within the immediate vicinity and that's been washed away.
Yeah.
There is a separate disaster unemployment assistance fund that you can apply for as well. But prior to this, had no idea it even existed. But I'm so glad because the financial burden that is coming, that's already started to set in, but that is coming, is just unimaginable. So every dollar helps. One of the things that I thought was interesting on the legal aid site is, they talk about the 25 counties that are eligible for aid. Looking at that list of counties, there's 4 or 5 of them in our service area that, we do closings in those counties. And those all of the North Carolina people are our people, but it's kind of wild to see Gaston, Caldwell, Catawba, Lincoln, these people are legitimately needing federal emergency aid. But there's some guidelines on how to answer the questions, because especially one of them I thought would be really tricky. Is are you willing to relocate? And I noticed that.
And doesn't that seem tricky? Because if I was someone in a vulnerable position where, like I don't want to leave my home, but my home is destroyed or the surrounding areas are, legal aid has put out this guide that's trying to help people understand, say yes. This is not asking you, are you going to move across the country to find, this is, are you willing to stay in a hotel while you can't stay in your home? Are you willing to stay in an apartment while you can't stay in your home? That doesn't mean some faraway land, and it doesn't mean that you'll never return to your home. Now, if you are not willing to leave your home, then you can't say yes to that question, right? But if you're willing to sleep a night or two or more somewhere else from your home because you can't stay there, then legal aid in this question is saying, say yes. Say yes to relocation because it opens up funding for that purpose. And then also learning so much, the reimbursement for the generators and the chainsaws.
Right. Receipts. They stress to hold on to those and submit those for reimbursement for any expenses. But FEMA will reimburse you up to $219 for a chainsaw, for example. Chainsaw, generators, all these items that are just crucial at a time like this.
Yeah. And then so let's kind of, if you're okay with it, Layla, let's talk through, we've hit on a lot of these, but there are 5 points on the legal aid website that I think they're finding that people are getting tripped up on. And but maybe before we do that, I'll mention if anybody is listening that is an attorney or in legal services, the North Carolina Bar Foundation has a way to sign up to provide assistance, and even allowing out-of-state attorneys to do that as well. But one of the number one things they need help with are the FEMA claims, and helping people through that doesn't require giving legal advice. So there are opportunities for other legal people that don't necessarily have their law license to be able to help with that. So maybe I'll get Ryan to put in the show notes somewhere the link to sign up. But can you talk about number 1 on their list of just the tips to make sure you're getting this application process quickly?
Sure, absolutely. So the first question is, do you have emergency needs? And this means during your evacuation or staying at your home during the disaster, do you need help with gas, medication, food, clothing, shelter, medical equipment? And from the food perspective, perhaps you've lost all of your food because of the power being out. And, you're, of course, if you run out of bottled water, in that situation, you'd have to start boiling water.
Yeah.
Well, do you have propane to do that? I mean, all of these things. So if you are lacking in any of those, then you would answer yes to this question.
Yeah, the medical equipment, as a lifelong glasses and contacts wearer, it's just part of my life now that I didn't think about the fact that glasses are considered medical equipment. So that would fall under that category too. That's, I'm glad these tips are out there because, again, tricky. It can be tricky. And it's not intended to be tricky, but, when you're in a vulnerable spot, you just read it at face value and don't think, don't have time to think deeper. The second one on their list, when asked if your home is or was accessible, accessible, they're talking about really being able to get in there, not just were you able to climb in a window and get some stuff out. So they're saying, no, your house was not accessible if there was debris, tree branches, continued flooding, loss of power, damage, or destruction that prevented you from staying there after Helene. So accessibility, yes, you might be able to get in, but if you can't stay, then that would be a lack of accessibility. So again, answering these questions appropriately will trigger assistance for hotels, and then also funding to use if you're staying with family or friends. Layla, will you talk about the third one?
Sure. So, and this could be tricky when they ask if your utilities are out. Even if your utilities have come back on, then you should answer yes to this question if you had any outage at all. Because then you can get reimbursement for costs associated with that, such as buying a generator or potentially hotel expenses.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important that share this with people that are filing FEMA claims. It's short enough. We're intentionally keeping the episode short and talking about the specifics. Legal Aid of NC is an excellent resource for you to be able to reach out. They've got guides online if you just want to be able to go and do it yourself, but then reaching out to get assistance from a person that will help you. I'm not bringing up numbers 4 and 5 because we already talked about it, like the relocation, and then you mentioned the reimbursement for the generators and chainsaws. Now it looks like there is a little bit longer deadline for the unemployment assistance. It's currently set at December 2nd, 2024. But there are some resources in flyers in English and Spanish to try to help more people understand what to do next. But otherwise, I mean, we're trying to keep this one short and to the point so that people can know, like, all right, I got to apply for FEMA assistance. What do I do? So, Layla, thank you for taking the time and for being kind of up to date on all of the stuff that's going on for our friends in Western North Carolina.